Welcome, everybody. I am so excited today to introduce you to Taylor, who is an extraordinary young woman and who's also had an extraordinary journey with idiopathic hypersomnia. Taylor Jackson, who is a crafter and animal lover, has also recently graduated with a neuroscience degree from Harvard University. She was diagnosed with idiopathic hypersomnia during her sophomore year of college and hopes to educate physicians and scientists on the realities of living with the condition. As a speaker with Project Sleep's Rising Voices program, Taylor shares her story to provide an honest look into the challenges faced during her IH onset and raise awareness about varying presentations of sleep disorders. So join me in welcoming Taylor. Taylor Jackson, it's so nice to have a few more minutes with you. I know we've met before, but I'm particularly excited because you get to share your story with our community, and I think they're really going to want to hear from you about your journey and your life as a person living with idiopathic hypersomnia. So welcome to our Living With series. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, why don't we jump straight in, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your life so far, where you live, what you do, and then we'll maybe dig a little bit deeper into your journey with IH.
Absolutely. I am currently living in a suburb outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I moved here from my hometown in Indiana so that I could pursue my dream of going to Harvard University, where I am excitedly finishing up my neuroscience degree. So at the end of this month, I should be set to graduate, which is quite exciting. But that takes up a pretty large monopoly on my time these
Mhm.
days.
Well, congratulations. That is huge. Um, it's obviously, neuroscience. Okay, why did you want to study neuroscience?
Funnily enough, I had actually decided to concentrate in neuroscience before I was diagnosed with IH, and it kind of ended up happening in a serendipitous manner where it ended up being extraordinarily useful and applicable to my personal life. But overall, I've always been very interested in what keeps us healthy. I have experienced many a moments where if I'm not in control of my mind or my body, I really don't have anything else to look forward to in the day. And I think we can only be as healthy as our body allows. So I've always been interested in the life sciences for that reason in particular. The neuroscience program at Harvard is extraordinarily helpful and full of wonderful advisors. So I just thought it to be a good fit at the time, unknowing of exactly how great it would really become.
That makes sense, but perhaps it would make more sense if you kind of gave us a little bit more history about how you developed idiopathic hypersomnia, the diagnostic journey, and also then that kind of interface between a person living with IH and actually doing, for most people, doing neuroscience at Harvard would be extremely rigorous and demanding. So that's another question. But tell us a little bit about your life with IH as a person living with IH.
Absolutely. So I today am very lucky to be on a medication regimen that works for me, which is the only way that my journey through Harvard has remained possible. But I actually have had symptoms of IH for just about as long as I can remember. I think it's a story we've heard quite often in the patient community, but valid nonetheless. And looking back, I always remember these moments of my parents trying to wake me up, how difficult it always was. Even times where I would turn on the light in my closet growing up so that I could close the door and fall asleep standing up because I was just not ready to greet the morning anymore. But now that I have moved out from my parents' homes and am a little more independent, the IH has affected me in some very different ways that I wasn't the most prepared for, considering I wasn't diagnosed at the time I moved out to live on my own. So, actually, after I had already decided that I would be concentrating in neuroscience at Harvard, I ended up having an episode where I fell asleep to hopefully take about a 1 to 2 hour nap. And I woke up and realized I had slept for 26 straight hours. And it was at this point that I realized I was no longer able to live on my own or to stay living in the campus dorms at Harvard. And I really needed to take some kind of situation away from school so that I could figure out what was going on. And it was at that point that even though I had already declared my neuroscience concentration, on my 20th birthday, I filed for a medical leave of absence from Harvard and I went home for about 9 months, where we went and saw all kinds of doctors to just try and figure out what was going on.
That's significant. So, okay, so you obviously realized that sleeping for 26 hours was probably the game changer, correct? To think that this is not normal.
It was definitely a game changer. I think what made it so undeniable was that it was accidental for me in that scenario. Because if you were to, in theory, try to sleep that long, it would be a little concerning if you were successful, even if you were trying, right? But there would be some gray area. But to do it on accident, there wasn't any privilege of having a gray area. It was simply concerning.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's extreme.
yeah.
So obviously that triggered you to take a break, but also pursue a serious kind of trajectory towards getting some kind of explanation. What
Yeah.
did that look like?
Quite frankly, it looked like a lot of dismissal, unfortunately. It looked like a lot of being called nasty names, being told negative things by nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, sleep physicians, just about anybody you could think of. I saw over 10 doctors from a wide range of specialties, just hoping someone could have something to help me understand what was happening to my body. And I had one doctor in particular tell me that I was just a college dropout looking for a justification of like making myself feel better, even though I hadn't dropped out. I had simply taken a year off, which is actually quite normal at my university. So I was very shocked to hear that. I heard the pretty typical mix of like, oh, it's in your head, nothing's wrong, you're just anxious, or things of that nature. I had ended up even getting intravenous vitamin transfusions because there was speculation that I was deficient in various vitamins, and that was why I was so tired. But at the end of the day, I kept sleeping very concerning stretches of time. For the entirety of my leave of absence from the college, the first 3 months, I slept anywhere from 16 to 22 hours a day, every single day. And for the following 6 months after that, I had weaned down to about 12 hours a day by the end of it. So there was just a lot of uninterrupted stretches of deep, hard sleep.
When you were awake during
Mhm.
that period of time, what were your wakeful hours like? Were you refreshed, functional, or still not able to perform the kind of things you needed to do?
Oh, goodness. I guess in that time, I was relatively functional because I was very lucky to have a good support system and very few relative responsibilities. But if I had continued being enrolled at Harvard during that time, it would not have been possible for me to engage in any of my schoolwork. There were a minimal handful of instances where I felt a little more refreshed from a nap or a long, deep sleep, but largely I always felt like my brain was foggy. I never felt like I was cognitively on my A game, as you could say, where maybe I was able to cook a dinner because I felt good, but I was never good enough to do Harvard neuroscience homework, which in all fairness
Sure.
is a pretty high bar. So,
Yeah, it is. And a big leap from
yeah.
cooking eggs on toast to studying. So, how did you actually get a diagnosis of IH then if you've had, obviously this really disappointing experience with an array of doctors, and I'm so sorry that you were called those names and misdiagnosed, undiagnosed. What happened next towards diagnosis?
Absolutely. So I was very grateful that even though I didn't find any kind of diagnosis after taking my 9 months off of school and making the pursuit of a diagnosis really my entire life, I was able to go back to school after that time was done because I had weaned myself down to sleeping only 12 hours a day. And at that point, most days I was able to do another full awake set of 12 hours without having to have a nap. And at that time, that was revolutionary for me. So there I was thinking, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm so much better than I was before, which was true. But then I came back to Boston and I got another MSLT and another overnight sleep study, did the whole alphabet soup of testing again here in Boston. And that was when a nurse practitioner at the hospital was even able to diagnose me with idiopathic hypersomnia, was based off a whole new set of testing.
Or the MSLT and so on.
Hmm.
I'm really curious actually, because how do you explain having had the 9 months and having this excessive amount of sleeping, the need for that, but then without treatment, kind of progressing to being able to stay awake for 12 hours so you could go back to school? How would you how would you explain that?
Absolutely. So at first, we were really at a loss for how it was possible too. My family and I all used to joke that it was simply my stubbornness of wanting to go back to school, even if we couldn't find a doctor to help. But we ended up much later down the line, while I was still in my leave of absence from school, being able to do some retroactive testing for any kind of viral illness I may have had at the time of when I was sleeping those accidental 26-hour stretches. And we found out that during my peak onset, before I had taken my leave of absence, I actually had contracted mono, which was contributing to all of that tiredness. So while quite a lot of it was the IH, quite a lot of it was kind of getting a double whammy. So
Wow.
as I was moving further away from that infection, I was able to focus simply on the IH tiredness rather than the combination of the two. And
That's interesting. Okay,
while
that's
I was
helpful, I
still
think.
struggling, it was
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, good for you. That does help. So treatment, you mentioned earlier that re-entering Harvard and the demands of the course and kind of living, a life that can sustain the demands that you're kind of put under. What you mentioned, you attributed that to an effective treatment regime. Is it okay if you shared that with everyone?
I'm happy to share my treatment regime. I'm not going to pretend that I think it's complete. It's open to change in the future, as I think we see a lot in our community. I'm currently taking methylphenidate as my like stimulant-based treatment plan. And the extended release, as far as stimulants go, is quite helpful for me. I'm very prone to crashing. So short-term stimulants are not for me quite as much. But I also do have a lot of like lifestyle changes that have come since my diagnosis, which factor into the success of how great a medicine can really be as far as helping to manage the tiredness. If you don't change anything else about your life and expect a medicine to perfectly fit you, it is going to take quite a lot of trial and error to find that Cinderella slipper.
Right.
So,
So that's a really good point, because I think it's easy to just, want a medication to be the fix all, and it is really hard to be disciplined on the lifestyle changes. But which lifestyle changes have really worked for you, Taylor?
absolutely. It can be really easy to want the medicine to do everything, and I certainly fall
Mm-hmm.
victim to that sometimes myself, even knowing that these lifestyle changes help me. I personally have switched to eating smaller portions rather than a couple of very large meals throughout the day. Not having a brick in my belly of very heavy food is very helpful in the efforts of keeping me awake. So, balanced snack size portions are very beneficial for me, especially if I'm on the go. They're easier to carry than a big bulky meal anyway, which is quite
Yeah.
helpful. But in addition to that, I really enjoy spending time outside, going for walks consistently. If I do have the energy to go to the gym or to exercise a little more rigorously, that does help me, particularly if I'm in a good routine with it. But I'm not going to pretend that I'm always consistently in a good routine with it. It's hard.
Mm. It's hard. So it's hard.
Yeah.
What about balancing, studying? Where are you at in your course?
I am in this kind of interesting limbo period right now where I have submitted all of my work and I am just waiting for grades to come back. So,
Okay, so you're very close to the end.
yes, the
That's
light at the end
in,
of the tunnel is
oh
here.
my gosh, congratulations, you've made it.
Thank you.
Just probably needing to sort of hear that you've got over the finish line, but that's
Yeah.
incredible. So, what's next for you?
That is a fantastic question. As of now, I know I
Sorry,
have,
I kind of
no,
I
that's
hate, I've
okay.
got graduates kind of, very newly graduated and emerging graduates in my house. And it's kind of like, it's the question, that you're like, "Oh, I don't really want to ask, but I think people might want to know, like
Oh,
coming from Harvard for you, what's next?
yeah, that's entirely okay. It's kind of an uncomfortable question to ask, but I think your graduates
Sorry.
probably, it's okay.
Yes, they
At
hate
some
it.
point, they hate it, but at some point, it is the talk of the town. It's the
Yeah,
question on
sure.
everyone's mind, and I can't blame you for that. So, as of now, I am currently hoping to consult for different companies in the central disorder of hypersomnolence space within the pharmaceutical industry. So that's very exciting. I'm really hoping that my background in my soon to be degree will allow for me to help bridge the gap between patient and scientists when it comes to looking at clinical trials for these new medicines that are hopefully on the way to help our community.
Yeah, that's that. I think you're going to be in a really good position to do that.
Thank you.
Especially I think with this kind of advocacy space changing a little bit and shifting towards, an acknowledgement that the patient is the expert, actually. So I mean, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I think it would have been a little bit more challenging, but I think it is a good time to kind of become an advocate and kind of say, actually, I'm the expert in my IH and my disease, and this is how I can kind of help educate everyone and contribute to the science, as you say, particularly with your background. So
Yes.
that's really exciting. Good for you.
Thank you so much. It is very exciting. And
Um,
scientists are their own kind of experts, but so are we.
Yes, absolutely. We wouldn't be where we are without them. Particularly, I think there's so much kind of exciting and current research in IH and drug development. But I did want to touch on one other thing, Taylor, like your perhaps your perspective, because you mentioned family support and support systems. How important do you think that is for someone living with IH to have that kind of support?
Honestly, I think it has the potential to determine your quality of life just as much, if not more, than having a good relationship with your prescribing physician. At the end of the day, everything you do is limited to how you can function. And if you need help from the very beginning of the day in waking up, you need somebody to help you wake up because the sleep inertia is just too heavy, or is particularly for people with narcolepsy as well. If you need help throughout the day to manage cataplexy or sleep attacks, just like some people with IH can have, we all need to lean on those who make us feel safe. And it's really quite important to know that you have those around you who are willing to help keep you in one piece, frankly, because these
Yeah,
diseases will run you ragged if you let them. And sometimes, even if you try really hard not to let them.
right. And outside of your family, did you get support from anyone at college or tutors, colleagues, peers?
Yeah, I was actually extraordinarily positively overwhelmed with the amount of support I got from my college. I think a lot of people in our community, just based on what I've seen in support groups here and there, are unfamiliar with just how many accommodations potentially could apply to us in an academic space. And I always encourage people whenever I can to take full advantage of any accommodations that may or may not apply and to just make a request for something that might seem a little out of the box because all of us know how we're affected way more than any advisor at a college accommodation center is going to know about a rare disease. I know for me personally, I had quite a few residential accommodations when I was living on campus, in addition to academic accommodations. And I'm
Okay.
happy to talk about those more if that's
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
is
I
useful.
think, yeah, I'm particularly interested in that because, um, yeah, let's start with the residential piece because it is potentially slightly different for people living with narcolepsy or someone with IH on an oxybate therapy overnight, as we know. So, what
Mhm.
residential accommodations did you get, Taylor?
Absolutely. They definitely have room to be different between the two. But for me, something that was really important was fighting the sleep inertia and ensuring that I was safe if there were to be some event that happened, such as a dorm fire or
Right.
flooding, that I couldn't wake up for on my own. And as a result, my school actually provided me with an alarm clock that was originally adapted for the deaf community. So
Mm.
it would shake the bed and flash strobe lights through my room at the time I sat. And it would yell extraordinarily loudly that it was time to wake up.
Ah,
So I would have multiple modes of stimulus to wake up, which was very helpful. And that alarm clock was also hardwired into the building's like smoke detection and fire
okay.
systems so that if all of the fire alarms in the building went off and I didn't wake up, it would set off my alarm. We
That's
also
amazing.
had, it was so nice. And they also hardwired a makeshift doorbell to the system as well, so that if there was any maintenance need in my room, the maintenance people had to ring the doorbell for us to let them into the room or the suite. And that would alert me by setting off my alarm clock whenever somebody hit the doorbell so that I could know someone was there if my roommate was not awake to hear the knock, because it certainly was not going to be loud enough to wake me up.
Wow. So you actually did live with a roommate, and did that pose any kind of problems with your sleep routine?
I mean, there were occasional logistical difficulties. I think there will be, even if you don't have IH or narcolepsy and live
Sure,
with a roommate.
sure.
But at the end of the day, I was very lucky that this roommate ended up becoming a very close personal friend of mine, and there was never any judgment. And it was actually a really nice situation where she was happy to learn more about IH and what it meant for me in order to be the most supportive roommate she could be.
Mm,
And it
wonderful.
also didn't hurt that we got an air conditioner because of my IH.
Oh, okay. That always helps, some white noise as well, right? So,
Yeah.
academic accommodations, what did you require?
Yes. So I have had a time and a half on all of my exams throughout university.
Okay.
I also have the ability to request that a sitting and standing, like transformable height desk be placed in any of my lecture halls. And that can help keep me from falling asleep if I can stand and raise it to use as a standing desk
Hmm.
rather than having to sit. Quite helpful. Um, I guess, as I had mentioned on the residential line, I also had an air conditioner because our building did not have air conditioning. But academically, I also had things that allowed me to bring snacks into classes or into exam sessions because I was
Mm.
unable to eat a very large meal prior to entering like a big lecture and then stay awake through that lecture. So I found that to be also extraordinarily helpful for times where there were long exams, like particularly for final exams, as they're on the top of my mind these
Sure,
days. Hours
sure.
are standardly 3 hours. So if you have a time and a half accommodation on top of that,
Hmm.
you're pushing quite a
Mm,
long time without eating, particularly if you can only have a small breakfast to ensure that you remain
right.
sharp for the exam. So it's very helpful for me to be able to have a couple of healthy, ideally quiet snacks to munch on while I sit with my water and do the exam. Because it's just a marathon,
Excellent.
and at some point you need some fuel for a
Yeah.
marathon.
For sure. That is super smart. And I think it's obviously contributed a lot to your success. And I hope that anyone listening is encouraged by that because it's so important to get the accommodations you need. It could be the difference between success or not. But I am also interested, Taylor, that you've struggled with brain fog. And if you kind of mentioned brain fog and then like an academic course as rigorous as yours, and that those two things don't sound super compatible. How would you explain your brain fog and how it's impacted your studying?
I guess it does kind of depend on the day or the severity, but at its most intense severity, my brain fog makes me feel like I'm a zombie. Quite frankly, I sometimes when that occurs, it's through having had my doses of medicine for the day. Sometimes it's just naturally occurring, and I don't bother to take medicine at all if I know it won't help. But when it's at its most severe like that, I don't drive. I often am not feeling confident enough to attend lectures because I don't have the same um, duration of ability to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wouldn't want to go into lecture if I'm not feeling well to not absorb anything. I would rather watch it later or play it back later.
Mm-hmm.
I know that largely a lot of people don't have that privilege to simply opt out of what they have to do in a day because they're not feeling well. And that's something that I don't take lightly as a privilege that I've had in college. We also have a program at my university through the accommodations office, which allows for you to have more attendance flexibility if you have a chronic illness. So that is something I have accommodations wise that has been remarkably helpful in allowing my brain fog to just kind of be catered to in the way that it frankly
Mm-hmm.
demands, whether it can be catered to or not.
Mm-hmm.
But if I am feeling like I am not fully cognitively intact, maybe that does mean I take a little bit out of a lecture one day here and there. And sometimes I can be really hard on myself about it. But I also just have to remember that there are plenty of fully abled young people in those lecture seats next to me who are looking on their computers and shopping for their next event who aren't taking the most out of it either. So I
Okay.
have to remind myself that not the standard
Yes.
isn't being perfect all of the
Yeah.
time, and that sometimes
Yeah.
just attending, even when you're uncomfortable or not feeling the greatest, is the biggest win you can have. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to have that sort of more global perspective. I remember people saying to me years ago, because I was complaining, that, or just really concerned that Matilda, my daughter has narcolepsy, and she was napping so much during every day she would lose
Yeah.
2+ hours. And that's just such a lot over, any given period of time, like 1 year or 2 years. And it was pointed out to me, people waste time all the time. They waste time on, social media. They waste time, as you say, shopping for the next event or just anything. And I think that is helpful to have that perspective, but also then maybe the kind of functional hours kind of count more. So the difficult side of that is that you don't have the kind of luxury, is it maybe isn't it, it's a good thing you don't have the luxury to spend hours on Amazon or what have you. So Taylor, it's so inspiring. Your story is so inspiring, and it's obviously been really difficult and complicated, but also one that is going to benefit the community. Congratulations on finishing Harvard in neuroscience, but also particularly glad that you're going to stay in the space and kind of leverage your expertise, both as a person living with IH and someone steeped in the science, to benefit everyone who's experiencing a disorder of hypersomnolence. So I'm really excited to see where that leads you, and also probably to work with you further downstream. But thanks for taking the time to share your story. It's super inspiring, and we're super grateful that you've managed to get where you are. Good for you, and again, congratulations.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated being here and chatting today.
Awesome. You're a rock star.
Thank you.